Hello and welcome to the Spiritually Incorrect podcast with me, your host, Shiv Sengupta. I'm the author of the Advaitaholics Anonymous books, Sobering Insights for Spiritual Addicts, a Manifesto for Spiritual Anarchy, and an Antidote for Spiritual Enlightenment, all published by Sarum Press. Today, my guest is someone I've had on this show now twice before, and I love having him on because honestly, he's one of the smartest guys I've had the pleasure of talking to, and he's also a lot of fun. And his name is Steven Lubka. Steven, welcome.
Pleasure to do this again, man. I always love and enjoy our chats and get a lot out of it.
I feel like we do one every year. I think the first one we did was 2022, then we did one in 2023, and now this is kicking 2024 off with another chat. And what's cool for me is just to see your transformation in the public sphere, in the Bitcoin space. Your star's really taken off. There's been this meteoric rise in your career, and it's just fascinating to watch because, correct me if I'm wrong, you're now getting interviewed by major television networks like MSNBC, NPR was the most recent one. Talk to us a little bit about that, like how that whole transformation has been happening over the last 2 years for you.
Yeah, it's been a ride, you know. It's been a process. I was an early employee at what is now a very, very successful Bitcoin financial services company. I run the private client and private wealth team. And I was like employee number 15. We're like 200 people now. One of the largest mining firms in the world, largest high net worth brokerage. So it's been across the board, just a wild ride and transformation. And that was over like 3 years. So it's not often you get to experience going from like that tiny startup world to, what is increasingly a very valuable and successful company over a 3-year time frame. So that's been awesome in of itself. As part of that, I started kind of building and, kind of developed a kind of profile online. I started doing a lot of media, kind of started with media just within the industry that other people might not know about. But in the last year, that has moved to CNBC, Wall Street Journal, NPR, Fortune, Bloomberg, all the kind of, basically anything that does financial reporting for the most part. And it's been great. It's, I've learned a lot. And, certainly like doing media, it was a learning curve. Like I was nervous at first for sure. And, it's also interesting kind of seeing how the sausage is made. There were things that surprised me. It's interesting being like the source in the media because you kind of see how something I say goes from my thoughts about the world to this sort of wide reporting that kind of other people read. And, this isn't always true, but like there's a bias that people like implicitly believe is truth, right? They implicitly believe, oh, if I've read it in this kind of reporting, like that must be right. And yet, like, it's hard to have knowledge about the world, right? Like it's hard to get it right. It's not saying that like it's wrong or you're saying something which is is untrue. But if you look at the history of humanity, like having accurate and true knowledge about the state of the world is an arduous and challenging task. And so like that was one of the interesting things for me was seeing how that process happens. And even in our kind of larger and more institutional capacities as a civilization, we're all just kind of working in uncertainty. You know, we're all just kind of working in this kind of process of navigating reality.
So if I had to summarize that, basically the media is turning you into a Bitcoin Osho, is what you're saying. So, but all jokes aside, I'm really curious about that comment you made about you get to see how the sausage is made. So you want to elaborate on that a little bit more? What have you learned from being behind the scenes?
Well, so the thing that surprised me, and there's a reason for this, I'm sure. I know why it is, but the thing that surprised me is there is no like adversarial environment. So, right, like let's say I'm subject matter expert one, or I'm the Bitcoin guy. I'm the guy that gets called on. And so I get asked a bunch of questions and I say, well, I see it this way, this way, this way, and this way. There's no like countervailing expert that gets brought on to like critique me and be like, no, I disagree with Steven. I think Steven's wrong about this, 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 and this. It mostly just runs. And you know, that doesn't really happen in most places. Like, and there's a good reason for that because it's like an infinite regress, right? If you have an initial kind of point of view and then you have one other person to kind of critique that, well, then do you need another person to critique that person, and so on and so on and so on? Nothing ever gets done. Nothing ever gets published. There's no content. The business doesn't work. But I understand why that doesn't happen. But it was still kind of surprising for me that it is, I think, a bit more about content nowadays. It's a bit less about truth. You know, not to say that I don't strive with every effort that I have to say what I see as true, but it's maybe not the focus of the media anymore. The focus is maybe more content.
So opinion parading as truth is essentially it. It doesn't matter how educated that opinion is. It's important to call out the fact that it is, after all, an opinion. It's a certain point of view, but it's not necessarily
And
the
it could be
absolute truth.
correct. It could be highly
Right.
accurate, right? But
Right.
it's not a machinery which is set up to discern that. That is the
Right.
main thing. It is not, maybe that person is right on the money.
Mhm.
And, you know, and in many things they probably are, like basic questions. There are, I think, things which are simpler to discern. But it's not an institutional machinery in large part that is set up to answer the question of what is true. It is an institutional machinery which is set up to create content.
Sounds like a spiritual satsang, if you ask me.
Yeah, I
Right.
absolutely. I
It's
mean,
it's it's essentially the idea of, proposing maybe revolutionary ideas, maybe not so revolutionary ideas, but there's no component of critical thinking, critical thought, and criticism involved in it. And this is very surprising to me, especially since Bitcoin, there's so much opposition to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general in the public still. Like many people don't fully grok what it is. They have a general sort of nebulous idea of what Bitcoin is. And maybe for the viewers here, because I mean, this is not typical content that we discuss on the Spiritually Incorrect podcast, but you know, maybe everyone listening isn't fully kind of, well educated on cryptocurrency. So why don't you give us like a little primer on crypto in general, but just Bitcoin specifically, and why you're such a strong believer and proponent of this technology?
yeah, okay. Yeah, new territory here.
Yeah.
So you could spend hours answering that question. I think that the fastest way, this is why I care about it. There are other reasons that other people care about it. This is why I care about it. We live in a very complex civilization. I would argue the most complex that our civilization has ever been that we're aware of. And there are just so many interlocking pieces, from technology, systems that, I mean, half of, not half, but a large section of government critical computing is written in a language that almost like a computing language, programming language that almost nobody knows how to write anymore. It's called COBOL. It's so antiquated and that nobody knows it. And yet we have critical infrastructure that is running off this kind of thing that we don't know how to maintain. And this complexity is baked into the system on every level, right? In traditional finance and the financial system, there is nobody that understands how all of it works. There is no kind of top-down authority that has a totalizing knowledge of the various flows of capital, interest rates, and currency swaps, how different markets work, how these different exchanges work, right? It's very, very, very robustly complex and opaque. And so we live in this system where there is vanishingly little totalizing centralized knowledge. And so instead, like, how does the world operate? How does it continue to operate? Well, it operates because there are many, many, many people who work together in kind of complex coordination to make the world work and keep the planes in the air and keep all of our economic forces running and going. And so in many ways, the system is maintained by a aggregate which transcends itself. There is no top-down authority. We live in a dynamic order that springs from the chaos of all of these kind of spontaneous interactions in our economic world. And for your audience, right, like, you probably don't spend too much time on average, I would guess, thinking about economics, and that may be a dull topic or perhaps a worldly topic that is, not something that has historically interested you. But let's be clear, like, it is how the world works, the world we inhabit, the world we live in, for better or worse, right? Like, this is the architecture by which it operates. And that matters, right? Like, if we don't want a breakdown of this kind of social order. And so, like, it's this very dynamic system. It's this very emergent system where there is not a lot of central direction. There's dynamic emergence from all the intricate millions of parts. Money can either facilitate that or it can impede that. And the reason I care about Bitcoin is because our current monetary system, I believe, is an impediment to that order, to that working well together. And the reason is, you can think of money as kind of like an economic measure, a monetary measure. And so, for example, a way to understand this is, like, if you go into the grocery store and you see that the price of bananas has risen, you have this single clean data point, the price of a banana or a bushel, a bundle of bananas. And that single number is a massive compression of what is the fertilizer situation in South America? How many banana farms were created or failed? What was the crop harvest like this year? What were the weather patterns like? How does global shipping, is global shipping impaired? What is the diesel price? Like, all of these infinitely complex variables get condensed down and output in the form of this one single computable number, which is price. And entrepreneurs, right, which, when I use that word, I just mean people that act, people that make all of this happen, businesses, entrepreneurs, individuals, can look at that single data point and it tells them everything they need to know. And that is how it should function, right? It should be that data point, that price should reflect the real world circumstances, boots on the ground, tangible reality that went into that output, the banana. But there's a problem. When the unit that price is denominated in, the dollar, can be printed arbitrarily from thin air, where a government, a bureaucracy can effectively issue a huge supply or a targeted supply of new dollars into the system, you suddenly have this big question mark that enters into that calculus. Is the rise in that price of the banana the result of a fundamental change in the economic reality of the production of bananas, or is it inflation? And so inflation isn't just a thing that impairs like the value of your savings and makes life more expensive. When it arises from arbitrary currency creation, it actually reduces the quality of information in the system, which may sound like a banal and technical point. And like, why is this guy talking about this? Like, why is he? But imagine how much human suffering results from a 5% global impairment in all economic activity. Imagine if the entire world became 5% impaired. How much human suffering results from that? Like to this day, in terms of like, not in this like, suffering in the spiritual sense, right? We can use that as kind of a psychological phrase, but there's another form of suffering and it's starving, not having enough to eat, not having enough medicine, not having a home to live in, right? This is, this is another form of suffering, right? And, almost the entirety of improvement in those conditions was due to the kind of the economic growth of the world, of this very complex system becoming increasingly capable of making life better for humans. And if you impair that 5%, you can't calculate how much damage that does. And some people might be listening to this and they might be very concerned with like, well, isn't the economic system like destroying nature, the planet? Isn't it consuming all these resources? Isn't it like, in my opinion, and some people might debate this, we can get into it, but like the rate of cohesion and progress of the totality of human social organizations is also the thing that will solve that. So you're also impairing the progress of the human species. Like money is a coordination tool that syncs up actors across time and space. And if you fuck that up, everything gets worse. So that is why I care about Bitcoin, because I view Bitcoin as a alternative to a centrally managed money supply. We could talk about this for hours, but this is not this is not a Bitcoin podcast.
Right. But why don't you talk about how Bitcoin then addresses those very issues that you talked about? A being the transparency, second, the inflation of the value of that currency or the perceived value of that currency. How does Bitcoin address all that? Because really, that's the crux of why Bitcoin is the viable alternative here, right? In your mind.
Yeah. So Bitcoin has a fixed supply. There are 21 million Bitcoin. There will never be more. And there is no central agency, party, group of corporations, government that can change that. It is kind of an independent monetary network. And so, I mean, basically the answer is that Bitcoin is a system which was designed to sit apart from the realm of human activity and to sit apart from the foibles of human governance and say, look, we can have a credibly neutral monetary system, one which we can have confidence is not being manipulated by human beings and can serve as a neutral ledger of account for all human economic transactions on some level, right? It doesn't mean everything has to happen through Bitcoin, but it means that there is at least one objective measure. It's like, imagine all over the world at night, a bureaucrat snuck into all of the engineering companies and slightly changed the length of a ruler, like the length of the ruler they're using. And it just creates chaos throughout the system. This thing that you're relying on to provide an accurate measure, the measure itself is changing and it introduces chaos. Whereas Bitcoin is saying, okay, wait, hold on, guys. Let's just have this one measure that cannot be altered. And so we can at least refer to that. We can at least refer our national currency to that. We can refer this activity to that. And we have something which stands still by which we can measure movement.
But we're going to jump in here for a second because you made a very important statement there when you said, let's make something that cannot be altered. So talk a little bit about that cannot be altered, because I think many folks don't trust Bitcoin because A, it's not regulated, it's not managed by the government. The very things we mistrust about our political institutions also makes us want to say, hey, how come they don't have a hand in this? And who's watching over this? Who's going to regulate it? Who's going to make sure there's no security hack? My Bitcoins aren't stolen. All those kinds of questions crop up. So some of that is inherent in the blockchain technology, obviously, but why don't you talk a little bit about that? What makes it so secure as this golden standard that nobody's going to fuck with?
Sure, absolutely. So what makes Bitcoin able to deliver on that is it is a incredibly robustly decentralized network. What that means is that the state of the network, the rules of the network, are arrived at by consensus. And so there effectively are thousands and thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of different participants. We could call them nodes. We can also call them miners. Those are two different things. I try not to get too much in the technical. But so basically all of these, think of it like you have an Excel spreadsheet. And, at some point you have to move money from column A to column B. Now, if only one person controls that spreadsheet, it's easy to manipulate. But if there are 100,000 people around the world independently checking, maintaining, and validating that spreadsheet, no entity can change it. They don't have the power to change it. There is a decentralized and distributed consensus on the state and the rules of the network. And so basically everyone that participates in it on a kind of a engaged level, they reinforce that the fixed supply, the rules of the network, these various things. And there's no way that someone can come in and change those because they would need to get everybody to agree. They would have to get everybody to agree to those changes, and nobody's going to because it defeats the purpose. And so you have this incredible story of this idea, which came from nothing and gradually spread and grew around the world until it's the largest computing network on the planet. And it maintains this globally decentralized, it's a ledger. It's a kind of an accounting system that humans can use regardless of which country they're in, regardless of what their government does, if their national currency is being debased, if they live in Argentina, if they live in China, in the US, right? One global network that people can connect with and through.
So the question of the hour, right? You ready for this?
Yeah.
Who is Satoshi Nakamura?
We don't know. And it's honestly one of the most marvelous and novel mysteries, I think, of the modern world. It's not easy to be anonymous, especially if you create something as widespread as Bitcoin, something's very successful and popular. It is incredible that this individual or group of people was able to maintain their anonymity, but we don't know. But it's also people like, so doesn't that worry you? Like, do they have control? And the thing about this code base, it's not just that the network is decentralized, the code is public. It's open source. Anybody can go read the code that runs Bitcoin. It's one of the most monitored and maintained code bases in the world. And there's no backdoor, there's no secret influence. It's all right there. You can read it. People do read it. Multitudes of developers pour over it. So it's not a concern that we don't know who Satoshi is, but it is a wonder of the modern world because it's not easy to do that.
Especially in today's age of social media and everybody knowing everything about everyone's lives, the fact that the founder of this technology is absolutely anonymous and nobody has been able to locate it is fascinating to be honest with you. Now I have friends who are hardcore anarchists, and they're also big fans of yours, by the way. They follow you on Twitter, and they just love everything about what you have to say. But they love this idea of a decentralized currency because really that's the core of the anarchist ideology. It's not chaos and riots in the streets. It's this decentralization of power so that the system itself becomes self-governing eventually. How does that translate then in your mind? I don't know if you have any thoughts on it, away from just the financial aspects of it to overall political governance, all of that. Is there a way we can decentralize it all?
So I don't think so. I don't think everything can be. So let's kind of work from the inside out. Would you decentralize your family? Would you put a poll up to the internet for how to raise your kids? No,
No.
right? Like no one's going to do that. Like, right? Like the family unit works very well as
Well, you
well,
should
it's not,
you should see some of the mommy groups on Facebook though, because they ask the most innate.
they're
Hey,
trying.
how do you guys think I should do this? Or I've seen this with a lot of parent groups of people asking for just community for little details, right, on how to do this or how to do that. So I think some of that's already happening. But yeah, to your point, continue.
Yeah. But you know, a family kind of functions best as a communist system with an autocratic leader, right? Like that's kind of what a family is in some ways. You share everything, but also like the kids are not in charge. Like the kids do not get they don't get to vote on if they get to eat ice cream for every meal, right? Like there is right. So you wouldn't want to decentralize that. And so then, you know, you use that basic example to scale outward and say, well, what are the things that are better decentralized and what are the things that aren't? I would argue like corporations are not better decentralized, right? Like you can't, it's good sometimes to have leadership and like directed guidance. But there are other things that are not good to have that way, especially something like money, where the temptation is so high to abuse it. Money is a very important social institution, and it's one where if anybody has central control of it, they will abuse it. The history of humanity tells us as such. And so it's a prime candidate for that. What other things? Well, you know, I mean, the internet decentralized information, right? Like prior to the internet, governments had a monopoly on information, right? Like the king or the president or whoever, like they controlled the flow of information for most of human history. There's a great book on this called The Revolt of the Public. And it talks about one of the first times this happened. It was actually when George W. Bush was president. And so you had a very famous TV anchor on the, you know, like I don't know what it is, CNN or CNBC or I don't know. It was NBC, one of these stations, right? And they're reporting this story that's saying, oh, I might get this wrong, the details. I think it's like, oh, we have this document that proves that Bush dodged the draft. And that's the story. That's what the media is telling you. Oh my God, like the president like lied to get out of the draft and faked it. And then some random guy, some Billy Bob 67 at yahoo.com, right? On the internet, on a random chat forum, discovers that the font on the document did not exist at the time that this document was supposed to be created, and it was a forgery. And so you have this random dude who contradicts the highest and most credible institution in kind of media, and it forever changed the landscape of information, right? So it, and with upsides and downsides, right? Like there definitely pros and cons there. But
yeah, I was just going to say, you know, just to play devil's advocate here, one of the things that I have noticed, especially with these mainstream media institutions, and possibly there's always been a little bit of curating and doctoring of information and putting in certain political biases wherever the, you know, powers that be were lobbying some of these media giants to present a story one way as opposed to the other. But what I've seen happen as a general trend in the internet era, so let's say the last 20 years especially, and the last 10, it's really, really come to the sort of stark forefront where, in my mind, most people now generally have a certain level of mistrust of mainstream media. It doesn't matter which side of the, you know, which political leaning you have. In general, trust in the media has dipped, right, over the last 10 years. And a lot of that I find is because now, because the internet has become decentralized, media giants are competing for views with the average Joe, right? With an Instagram influencer or some kind of a political blog that's got a huge following. And so they're creating the same kind of low quality clickbaity headlines and news stories and garbage content just to suck your attention, so you'll give them more viewership because that's what generates money. So it's no longer about, to your point, the way you started this whole thing about content over truth. It becomes so content driven that it really doesn't even matter what the content is. They're just desperate to compete because the whole playing field is just blown wide open, right? And so in a way, whereas there was some kind of, again, we can cast a lot of aspersions on whether the media ever reported the truth. Chances are the truth was never 100%, the priority. But there was always this sort of elite information source that, our parents, our grandparents especially, sitting in the morning, the first most important, order of the day was to sit down with that newspaper and read it back to front, because that was the world's news. And it was generally people who were very qualified going out there, putting their lives on the line to report on this kind of stuff. Now it's just kind of like, well, whatever, anybody can be columnist.
That had a lot of benefits.
Right?
And the issue is, like, most people are probably neither qualified to parse the information broadly nor qualified to speak on it. It's like coming back again to the beginning. The truth is hard. It is difficult and challenging to arrive at a very accurate view of the world and events. And when you have this free-for-all media information landscape where everybody has a microphone and everyone's a broadcaster, and it's just this war between the indie news outlets and the mainstream news outlets and the bloggers and the Twitter accounts and the average person is neither prepared nor equipped to parse that. And it's like, and I would argue, like, you can't without some sort of knowledge on the topic at hand, right? Like, if you don't know about the Moroccan history, how are you going to determine if your favorite YouTuber or the New York Times is right or wrong about Moroccan history, right? Very challenging. And so it's been a big difficulty for people in the world, right? It's not clear to me that it necessarily is better than what came before, even though it's more decentralized. I actually think, like most things, it's asymmetric. And what I mean by that is that I think the modern and all the technological impacts, I think technology specifically is often very asymmetric, in that there is a small percentage of people who benefit tremendously by it. And I don't mean like the owners of that technology. I mean like people that can take advantage, and I say that in a very neutral way, they just like can navigate this landscape well and can put their voice out there on the internet and can learn and can parse the bullshit. Well, they get supercharged by the state of this world. It's much better for the highly curious and highly intelligent, but it's much worse for the average people. And so, like, when we look at America, like, increasingly what I see is an asymmetrically polarized society, not towards the wealthy, but towards the highly intelligent and the highly capable. And the society is increasingly, it serves up the most powerful landscape for this segment that they have ever been able to use through technology. But the people who pay the price are the average person who is bombarded with information, super stimuli foods, like all of these things. It's a rough environment, one that we have no evolutionary basis for, and increasingly favors a level of like mental abstraction that is hard for people. Our society increasingly celebrates people who can abstract to the nth degree. I'm not saying that's bad per se, but it is extremely asymmetric.
Yeah, I think it's also kind of where society is going, right? Because the more technology, AI, robotics begins, the more jobs and more skill sets that get automated, it is the highly abstracting kind of arenas in which people will find employment eventually, right? And I see this a lot in my own challenges. I'm gonna draw some parallels with my personal position right now. Being somebody who has a history of working in the tech sector, right?
Yeah.
But I also happen to live in small town British Columbia, a town of 4,000 people. Now, during COVID, all of that was fine because a lot of work was remote and all of that. But now I find I'm increasingly challenged with finding work, primarily because every single recruiter I've ever spoken to says, well, you're out there, you really need to be in Toronto or Vancouver or Montreal, or one of these major hub cities. And, I'm trying to see, can we create a bridge between the demographic that typically tends to live out in the country in the smaller towns and the demographic that moves to the big cities where, again, similar to the United States and Canada too, most of the voting seats are concentrated in the urban centers, which tend to vote liberal, and the seats in out in the rural tend to vote conservative, but they're a smaller minority. And so these sort of values then become very constrained within the urban centers, right? And they're creating a situation which, even if you wanted to leave that, you want to break that mold, you want to be able to say, okay, I'm a highly intelligent, highly capable person, but I want to live on the other side of the fence. Can I do that? Can I bridge that gap? And the system says, no, you can't. Come back to where you're supposed to live and be the person we need you to be in order for you to thrive. Otherwise, you can't do it. And this divide then becomes more and more wide. And I see this with my peers who live out here. Most of the people that I interact with in the community work in forestry or lumber and things like that. Their values are not represented at all in society. Nobody even knows what they think. Nobody cares what they think, right? Steven, give me a second. I'm just going to let the dog out because otherwise he's going to keep barking.
Yeah. Yeah, and this actually has a very hidden incentive, and it what it does is it funnels financial resources to a group of people I've called nowhere people. And what I mean to say is it is people who are embedded in their local community, in their families, in their culture, their religion, their context, their community, do not want to move their whole life to Hong Kong at a moment's notice, to London, to Dubai, to Toronto. The people who will pick up everything and move is a specific type of person, which is then the self-selecting bias that fills companies with only the type of people who have no relationship to their community, to their religion, to their culture, they're these nowhere people that are not, they're not anchored in a place. They have no relationship to place. They constantly move around in this kind of 2-decade arc of their career until they burn out. And that biases, it's a hidden bias in the corporate landscape where almost everybody that's participating is a very radically different psychological mindset than the average person today and throughout all of human history to an astonishing degree. Like, it is a different psychology. And the system of incentives almost ensures that the people who make the most money and are in the largest corporations are those types of people.
Yeah, I saw this over and over. I've seen this over and over again in the last 20 years. And this is why I've had this love-hate relationship with the corporate world where I'm good at it, I succeed at it, but at some level, there's this internal resistance to the culture it fosters, which is it's not a culture that fosters a sense of community. It's not a culture that fosters time and connection with family. There's a lot of the optics of it have shifted. A lot of the optics are, oh, we want you to take time off when you have a baby and all of that kind of stuff. But that's just the optics of it. The reality of it when you get inside is, you're right, they incentivize a certain mindset, a certain mentality that is not sort of congruent with the values and the ethics that are needed in order to foster that sense of community, right? But I want to segue a little bit from here. You've got a lot of these, perspectives on life and this desire to see clarity, desire to see with truth. Now, let's talk a little bit about how you got to this point in your own life, because there's a whole spiritual angle to this that we haven't even touched, because we've been talking about Bitcoin and all of that, and you've become this Bitcoin persona, but you didn't start off that way, right?
No.
And we've touched upon this a little bit in previous podcasts, but let's talk a little bit about what your life was like before you had your awakening experience that then catapulted you in this completely different direction, which I believe you hadn't even anticipated.
Yeah,
Right.
no, that's correct. Prior to that experience, I basically had never done any of this. Never thought about this. My whole life kind of changed in a kind of external capacity in the years that followed that. But so like I grew up in the Catskills in upstate New York, in kind of like a new age town/community, town more so. But I had parents that were kind of part of the whole new age, spirituality kind of movement. My just very, very, very engaged in all that. And they made for a very magical childhood, but also a childhood that was very ungrounded from the real world. And it set me up for some challenges. I had a rough kind of adolescence. I had a number of challenges there. I had a lot of conflict at home, and all of it kind of like accelerated for a while until I kind of realized at 18 that I needed to really, really change the trajectory my life was on. I really needed to reevaluate basically everything. And like there was a real moment of grace there. One that it really was beyond myself. I mean, it really was something beyond myself came alive. And I had been on I was very unhappy, and I felt like I got a redo. Like I felt like I got I had fresh eyes on everything. It was like starting over. And that was probably like the seeds of it. But a couple of years went by. I was still very young. I was 18 at that point. And a couple of years later, I found myself like aggressively there was suddenly this thing that kind of activated in me. And it was like I just became like super curious about like the universe. Like it was very like undeveloped, but it showed up at first as like this sudden rampant curiosity about just like what the universe was, what life was, what is this like. And I mean, I was like, I'm not like I was reading Wikipedia, I was reading about physics. I was like, this wasn't this like sophisticated spiritual undertaking, but there was this thing which preceded it. And this actually culminated in me having like a sudden meditative experience. Where at the time, the words I would have used was like, I came to know like a sense of like being, of beingness. And I discovered that I could like rest in that there was actually something I could do where I could sit, I could rest in that. And the thought occurred to me at the time, like literally, like I was like, oh, this must be what meditation is. And it felt like this thing I'd been looking for my whole life. It was like so deeply nourishing. I like years, I mean, literally like 2 years ago, there's a classification system of a certain sort of meditation in kind of Buddhist practice and in the Pali Canon called Janna meditation. There's 4 jhanas. There's jhana 1, 2, 3, and 4. And like to label this, which literally like I had no idea until 2 years ago, right? Like I kind of did a whole practice and things happened from that with no knowledge of this. So the knowledge is like very incidental. But this is like what would be kind of classified as like jhana 1. Like I basically stumbled into being able to access jhana 1. And so like what I did for the next years, and then I really had this. So when it happened, there was this other kind of knowing, this kind of voice in me that was like, there's more here. there's more here. I need to like keep going. I need to find out what this is. This is in no way like it doesn't stop here. And so I mean my primary path for the next 5 or 6 years following that was I did a lot of that style of meditation, that which kind of came and so it's characterized by a few traits. One, it's effortless in a sense, like it's not concentration based in the sense that I'm focusing, I'm trying not to think, I'm counting the breath, whatever. If that works for people, that works for people. It's not me criticizing it. But it was kind of effortless. It was kind of like almost like an attention redirect and then just stay there. And the staying was easy. It doesn't mean thoughts couldn't come in and it just happened with like there's some sort of like returning, but it was very light, very effortless. And the other kind of quality of jhana meditation is it's extremely pleasurable. Like it feels good. It feels nourishing. Jhana 1 is more of a like a physical sensation. Jhana 2 is more like happiness instead of body. Like Jhana 1, body feels good. Jhana 2, mind is happy, is euphoric. And so it's a specific type of meditation, and it's one that I did for years. And the other kind of interesting thing is like I didn't do seated meditation. I've never really been a seated meditator. I would do it in small bursts throughout the day. Walking, chopping up food, whatever. Like I would just kind of drop in for 5 minutes or something. But I do that a lot. I would do that like very frequently. And I did some longer meditation. I did some other things, but like it looked a little substantially different, I think, than what a lot of people think of when they think about like how you are supposed to meditate and what that's supposed to look like. Not that like, I mean, I know people that have done that and it has been wonderful for them. I share that not to criticize that, but just to say that like there is no rule set of how this has to look or how this has to go. It's not like there's one way to do it, right? In fact, I think it's literally the opposite of that. I think there is no one way. But so I kind of had this meditation practice that I took from and there and ran with it. And it also was like, there was also like an integrated component of like being a good person. Like this was not separate from like, I kept trying to be better, to be less reactive, to be more understanding, to be kinder, to just live in integrity, to not lie, to not like, it was this real push to just live ethically and well, and then also to work on the psychological content in myself that maybe made that hard at times. So it was this kind of this multi-year 5 or 6 year combination, like meditation and also just like me, the person, like let's be good. Let's be good in the world. And then that culminated in again like another kind of spontaneous experience. Like these things, I really think awakenings and these kind of moments where, and so when I use the word awakening, I mean a permanent shift, like something which changes, like, and it generally has to do with identity. It has to do with not like what is my mental identity, but how do I experience myself? And that there was like a notable like shift, which is not transient and is not undone like later. Like plenty of people have these kind of breakthrough momentary experiences, but I think there are several. I think there's kind of like the big one, which a lot of people kind of talk about in the spiritual world, like kind of the kind of more complete thing. But there's also, I think, lasting changes that happen before that. And so after about
Yeah,
5 or 6,
I just want to jump in there. And the way I would, categorize an awakening is I find like there's a new dimension of self that suddenly enters the equation that never goes away after that. It's in the word shift, there's this misunderstanding I've seen a lot of people have, is that, oh, I've shifted out of ego into the sense of being, and so I'm never egotistical again. And that's not true.
Yeah,
The
correct.
ego's still there and you're sort of going right back into it, but suddenly there's this new dimension. And my first awakening was that dimension of being coming in that you talked about, which
Yeah.
suddenly I'm there half the time, right? And then most recently, and we'll get to that a little bit later, and then our chat after that, but more recently is this shift into that awareness, beyond just the being itself. And now there's this third dimension, and I'm inhabiting the entire spectrum now. And that shift, you're right, you don't go back, because once you see it. There's no going back from there. And yet it's normal, it's kind of ordinary, right?
Yeah.
So just that little insertion, and then continue with your story there.
100%. No, I agree with everything you said. And even that, those three, like, that tracks exactly to my experience. There was first this kind of sense of being that, like, it was like before that, it was like I was alone. I was adrift. Like, life was not very good. I was incredibly, like, this profound sense of egoic isolation, this profound lack. And that beingness was like, oh my God, there's something here which is like real and nourishing and important and sacred. And then so anyway, so yeah, 5 or 6 years I'm doing that. And then suddenly I have this awareness. There's this awareness shift, this awareness awakening. And the way I would define this is it's back here. It's like, it's observer, it's the observer. It's like, and it was literally this thought, I was like, holy shit, this is what I experienced. I've been experiencing my whole life as this person, as this very bound person identity. And actually, I'm just the thing that's watching. I'm just the thing that's seeing it. And that can sound like an intellectualization or something, but it is incredibly visceral, phenomenological, experiential shift. And so then this thing happens. And that is a dangerous moment. I actually think that is the most dangerous, the most fraught with pitfalls, is once that happens, because it is very easy to get stuck in that observer witness. And it will feel extremely liberating at first, but it's actually purgatory. It's actually a no man's land. It is, because what happens is, like, there's this tendency, because it feels very free relative to where you were. And so there's a tendency to kind of camp out there. But the thing is there is, like, you turn the person into an object. Like, you're just observing the person. And you'll see the people that are in this place, there's so much talk around like, oh, like trying to change themselves in a way of like, oh, I can either, like, this very, very nihilistic acceptance of everything, or it's like, oh, look, I can see that I'm getting into ego again, or I can see that I'm being reactive. And it's like this dismantling project of the person.
Or there's another one, which is, from that witness perspective, the first thing that becomes very, very obvious is that all of this is just happening spontaneously, right? The cause and effect and all of that is so nebulous. It's very hard to pin down. So it's all just happening, including the thoughts and motivations and moods and attitudes. And so when you sit back there, you go, well, I really don't have a choice about any of this. So I'm just not going to do anything.
It doesn't matter if I'm a dick.
No, it doesn't
matter if I'm a fucking shitlord to people.
It's happening.
Like, it's not really me doing it.
Right, exactly. And it is, you're right. It's a huge temptation, because bonus number one, you get to step right out of that whole story of the suffering and the challenges that come with the human life. Even if you don't believe in the story of Shiv or the story of Steven, just living a human life is fucking challenging, right? There's financial challenges, there's emotional challenges, there's physical health-based challenges, and it doesn't get easier as you get older. It just gets harder. That's inevitably, life gets harder, and then you die. That's the reality. And so here's an option. I just step right out of it.
Yeah.
It's a true space anyways. I know. I'm not
ultimate transcendence.
The ultimate transcendence. And really, when you look at the great saints and sages and teachers of wisdom, like your brahmanas and stuff, that's what they were doing anyways. They're living out in the camping out in a mountain and really wanting to be left alone until people came and bothered them and dragged them down the mountain and built an ashram around them. They were content living there. And when you look at your yogis and your Tibetan Buddhist monks, they're all doing that. And so mind goes, well, that's an option. Why would I? What is the incentive? And maybe you can answer that question. What is the incentive for a person to re-engage?
So what happened for me is I did that for a while. And it's like, yeah, it's like there's this sneaky trap that's like, oh, it's all just happening spontaneously. I have no control over it. I'm just watching it happen. The life is just spontaneously unfolding. And I'm just like, what happens is, and I probably was camped out in that place for like a year, and it was during a very hard time in my life. So it was like extra incentive. I was going through, it was very challenging circumstances. I graduated college and things were not great. I was trying to get on my feet. And anyway, I was still, I don't know, 25, 26, like figuring things out. And I was camped out there. And what happens is like all the life starts to drain from your life. It starts to become very uncomfortable if you're honest enough to look. And if you're honest enough to look, you'll know there's this sense of like, this can't be it. Something is not right. This is not the fruit of the spiritual path. This is not the mature fruit, the mature like something is barren, something is lifeless. And I was very fortunate. One of the great miracles of life and one of the great miracles of this process is by providence, I was introduced to a guy who was like kind of a spiritual teacher. And I like this guy. He was one of the people I could like kind of connect with at the time. He was like a martial artist. He was cool. He was kind of, I mean, he was like 38 or something. He was kind of younger. Like, he was kind of edgy. And that was, but like, like had real understanding. And what this guy, told
Is
me.
there someone who we would all know by name? Or
His name was Atreya Thomas. So he was online and he was public and then he disappeared. He literally, I have no idea where he went. He completely stopped teaching. He completely stopped, like he walked away from the whole thing. And I think I know why. Like I think that was good for him. But it was kind of like he had gone through like the real kind of final-ish stage of that awakening process. And, it was probably in like the 2 or 3 months following that, 6 months following that. And then he was like buzzing and like teaching online. I think when he chose to walk away, it was, he realized that wasn't actually serving him, would be my guess. But I don't know, because he truly, I haven't spoken to him in years. But we talked and we engaged, and he gave me this one. He kept kind of giving me this one pointer, and the way he phrased it was, come to the front of your body. And so if you think of that kind of observer witness, it's literally phenomenologically experienced as back here. You're like back here. And he was like, dude, it doesn't matter if you have these problems. It doesn't matter if you have these issues. If you like, you use this or do that, or like you get mad at your mom, or like just come to the front, just live, just come to the front of your body and accept it. Just accept it. And it was the pointer really worked for me at the time, because I really experientially felt myself back here, and I could do that. I could come back, and it was uncomfortable, but I put that into practice. I mean, it was kind of intense. I was intense at that time. I was very I was an ardent spiritual seeker. I was obsessed. And I just intensely put that into practice. And
I'm going to jump in here for just 1 second here, Steven, because that pointer that this guy gave you to come to the front of your body, this is like resonating with me hugely, because I've been essentially practicing the same thing, because I realize and I can understand the fear that people have of doing that and wanting to camp out in that witness position, because I realize that you got the body here and the witness is back there. And right in that space in between is the fucking mind and all of it there. And so when you come to the front of the body, mind is behind you and you have no control over what it's going to do because it's behind you. You can't watch it. But when you're sitting in that witness position, you've got the full vantage point. You get to watch what it's up to, its shenanigans, its antics, and all of that. And because we don't trust the mind, we want to stay there and keep an eye on it. But the moment you're doing that, you can't participate in life. It's this weird dichotomy. So in a way, you got to just be like, yes, I can see it. I can go back there anytime I need to. But in order for me to embody and participate in this life, I have to have a certain level of trust that even if my mind's going to do what it's going to do, I can handle it.
And this is, I wasn't raised Christian. That's not my background. But this is the wisdom of the Jesus story, because that coming to the front, it is self-sacrificial in a sense. It is this kind of pure, detached, transcendent witness saying yes to the pain and suffering of life. And so like in the mythos of that imagery, like I found myself reflecting on that like many times, that like there is this mythos, this imagery there of just like spirit sacrificing itself to the world. I can't think of something that describes better than that surrender from this untouched transcendence to just like you said, human life is difficult. It's painful. It's challenging. There are so many things. It is not easy. And but that is what one must do. Like the arc is, you know, like if we use like a simple kind of model, we start out just total, well, maybe not like at birth. I think, at birth, babies are, kind of there. But, by the time we're 18, 12, 14, 15, we're like completely identified with the personality, completely identified in this sense. And so then there's a transcendent movement of waking up from that. But then there's a return journey of re-embodying that. And you need both. And so he gives me this kind of pointer. He gives me this kind of cue. And I just, as a very, man, I was driven. I was obsessed. And as the sort of person I was then, I obsessively put it into practice and throw all of myself at it. I mean, 6 or 12 months, it really wasn't long. I have this other shift, which really felt like the fruit of this whole process. And it was like, so this again, spontaneous. I think these things just, they come when the system and life is ready. I'm spending all this time kind of coming to the front and being there. And then suddenly it's like, so like in describing that, there's a behind and there's a front. And I'm like there's these two locations. And then suddenly it all collapses. There is no longer two. There's just like seamlessly this. It's one thing. There's no inside and outside anymore. It's one seamless, unified procession of phenomena that I experience myself as like I'm the happening. And I don't say that in a way, like so many fucking teachers use that phrase and it sounds like they're describing something devoid of personhood. It is not devoid of personhood. Like your personhood is still here. You're still a person. You still have wants and fears and desires and impulses and everything. Nothing changes. And I'll drill down on that because I think that's a really critical point. But in comparison to experiencing yourself as this identity, which was this false perception, the only true like locus of identity that you can say is just the happening, the verb, just this, like, and it's all one thing in this very unified and fundamental way. And then in that, your conventional personhood arises, and you still inhabit that in a very real way. Now, one of the things that is so crucial to understand here, and after I had the shift, which was, it's been, I don't know, 6 years since, something like that. That state has been permanent, like that is not, in 6 years, that has never varied. It was like a permanent shift that occurred then. And but like, a year or two after, I connected with a guy who kind of affirmed like where I was, like, because it's still possible to feel after that. Like the sense was like every cell in my body, every fiber of my being was like, this is it. This is what I was looking for. It is, but if you're like one of these ardent seekers, if you're like one of these people that like lit your whole life on fire to do this spiritual thing, it's possible to have a voice in the back of your head that's like, well, what if I'm wrong? And what if I stop short? Like, I've put my whole life into this fucking thing and I feel like this is it. What if I'm wrong? And what if I spent all this time seeking this thing and then I convince myself and I miss the real thing, right? It's a neurotic fear. But anyways, I talked with this guy who I had good faith and reason to believe was awakened, had gone through this process. And at a point, like, he affirmed to me like where I was at. He was like, yes, like that is it. Like that was good for me to hear. And it let me kind of drop the kind of neurotic guard. But one of the things, like the moment I felt like we really clicked and it was seen, like it's hard to determine where someone is at internally. That's one of the pitfalls of so much spirituality, is like, how do you objectively determine internal achievements? It's very hard. But the thing where that really happened, so like a week or two after this happened, there was this initial kind of short honeymoon period where just like the seamlessness and the intimacy of reality was so like amazing and overwhelming. But after like 2 weeks, suddenly this realization crept in where I'm like, holy shit, everything is exactly the same. Like all my pains, all my like, it's like phenomena are in no way altered. It is not a permanent euphoric high. It is not this like, oh, you have all these good feelings all the time now. Like it is, what changes is none of the external phenomena, none of the world stuff. It's just where you're seeing it from. It's the space in which you're experiencing it. And that is amazing. And that is worth every effort in life to experience that. It is incredible. It is in many ways like it was the start of my life. But there's also a very profound way in which literally nothing changes. It's all exactly as it ever was. And I was pissed because I was this like ardent guy. I was this like I was on a mission, and I was like, holy shit, I didn't get anything. I thought I was going to get something. I thought I was going to achieve this like this possession of mine, this thing that I was going to have.
Or at
And I
least
was like,
emotional equanimity or constant peace of myself,
yeah,
something, right?
something like some sort of good thing. Like I feel good all the time. And I was like,
Look, mom, this is what's happened and this is how I can quantify it, right?
exactly. And it was like, holy shit. And I was angry. I was like, for like 2 weeks, I was like pissed. But that's not the whole story. Like there's a level where that is very real and that articulates a very clear and true depiction of what happens. And yet also there is this other level where you now are experiencing everything in a totally different way. And that sounds paradoxical, but it's the only way you can describe it. It is paradoxical. It's like there's these, yeah, anyway, there's these two layers, except there's not two layers. But anyways, when I shared that story, that was the moment the guy I was speaking with, like we really connected, and there was this kind of affirmation of like, because it's almost comical. Like this is the tell. Whenever people like think that they've gotten enlightened or whatever, and they're wrong, they're almost always wrong in the same direction. And it's like, I had this incredible experience and I felt euphoric and filled with light and whatever. And they're almost always wrong in that direction. And the comedy is that like the real thing has zero alterations in a certain way to your phenomenological reality. Like, you know, if you punch me in the arm, the punch feels exactly the same. If I feel desire or attachment or anger, or it feels exactly the same in terms of like in the same way, like the color green looks exactly the same as it did before. I can be in a different place seeing the color green, but the greenness of the green has not changed. The painness of the pain has not changed. The angerness of the anger has not changed. And yes, you still have desires and wants and attachments, and like that does not go away. It does not. Like you still have all of your problems and all of your things and your idiosyncrasies, with the big caveat being you suddenly are experiencing those in a new way. And the way in which you are now experiencing and relating to life opens up a door of possibility where you are more able to remedy those things than ever before. And that is the good news. Nothing happens automatically, basically. Maybe sometimes a few things. But like generally speaking, you will be almost exactly as you were, with the exception of like meta neuroses, which were derived purely from identification, which is almost not worth talking about. But like, you know, there's some levels there. But like, it's like if you break your arm will always be a little bit different than if you hadn't broke it, right? There's a kind of a permanent, like it might still be fine, but it's like the bone's different. There's a heel, there's a scar on it. Our psychology is the same. If you grow up and your parents are shitty to you and you don't get what you need and you have a hard time, like you're not just like magically as if that never happened to you. Like we're the same way. Like and awakening does not like magically remove like the idiosyncrasies of yourself, which were derived from your life experiences.
Yeah,
However,
the way I like to put it is awakening doesn't heal you. It just shifts your perspective on how that healing needs to take place, right? And the the anger, the frustration, the attachment, none of that goes away. It's just a new intimacy with that. It's no longer creating a separate person who is now going to resist the experience of the anger. You're just free to become that anger with no judgment. You just like fucking act it out. And you act it out and then you act it out until the anger itself becomes intelligent enough to know that it's not fruitful, right? And that new, it's like there's new information that comes in because now you're open to the environment and whatever the environment is teaching you, as opposed to when you're trying to manage the situation because you want to gain control over the situation, then you're basically only repeating old behavior because nothing new can come in. So it's more like this, nothing changes other than the perception becomes absorbent. And through osmosis, things happen. It's not even by choice, it's through osmosis. New revelations happen and new ways of approaching these problems just sort of organically come in, just like everything else is evolving in the environment. Every creature, every organism is living in that way. They're not intelligently deciding to evolve, they're just evolving through osmosis with the system. And similarly, human beings, we're just evolving with the system. But the moment we create the secondary identity that separates us from the system, then we're just trying to manage our relationship with it at all times, right? And that's the part that collapses, I think, is what you're trying to say.
And it's like that part resists the flow. And so suddenly that part, which is meta, it's constructed, it's artificial, it's layered on top, that collapses, that is permanently gone. This like reflexive meta loop of awareness. Like it's not a real thing. It's like, that's why you can say like the ego isn't real. Like it's a really shitty statement. Like it's a bad statement because the word ego is used to refer to like so many different things. It does not refer, like if we're going to reclaim the word ego and we're going to define it as the thing that actually disappears when you have this awakening, the only way you can define the word ego is as a like self-referential reflexive mental loop It is a like process by which the mind spins in on itself. And that's all it is. It isn't your personality. It isn't your tendency. It isn't your desires. It's literally just this action, this thing, the act itself of identifying and closing in. And yeah, but so when you're in this, so you shift from that goes away. Your experience is unified, your experience is whole, and that allows you to start the personality to unwind. It's like this, and it's gradual. It occurred for me. I mean, it's not done in any capacity, but like the process by which that happened was like gradual over years. And what I watched is that, and you can resist this process, and that is all of the bad gurus in the world. Like this isn't automatic. This doesn't magically happen. You can fight it. You can say, no, I'm going to be a dick. And I think the stakes are really high to do that. But if you participate and you go with it, it's like this psychological unwinding. It's like this knotted, painful parts, they start to harmonize. It's like they're held in a greater space, in a loving container. And over months and years, they come into a new balance, which is, if I were to get kind of like ontological, I would actually say it's like your original face. It's like who you were meant to be. It's like your actual nature as a person, like just your personal nature. That is not wrapped up in all of the conditioning and the pain of the world. And you start to reconnect with that. And that process was really wonderful, right? And it's hard, it's challenging. It's not just like this easy magical thing. It's all of your sticking points. It's all of your painful contradictions. And you've got to really you got to really show up with some bravery to participate in that, because it'll take you through all of these things. And you need to let that change. You need to let yourself change. But on the other side of that, and during that, very, very interspersed and during, and, this process has been going on for me for 6 or 7 years. It will continue until I'm dead. Like there's no finish line, but so much changed. Like I changed, like me in the external world, like the person I was, how I moved through life, even what my life looked like. We talked about, like you said, like at the beginning, like, yeah, like my life is so different now. What I do, how I act, what I'm interested in, like there's and some of those things were purely internal. Like some of those things were me and how I relate to the world. Other things, like I related in this way. I had like a neurochemical imbalance between GABA and glutamate. And I just happened to meet this guy that happened to like give me this protocol of like fucking supplements and herbs. And it changed my brain. Like I used to get migraines like every 2 weeks, and I haven't had one like basically in a year. Like and like how I feel became radically different. So that was even like a purely external intervention. But it just like by chance, like I didn't go looking for it. I didn't even know that was a thing. And I just happened to meet this guy that like fixed this tremendously long-standing and the reason I say that, and the reason I connect that to this process, this like seemingly random external event, is because I just see it as part of this larger trajectory of harmonization, of like coming back into some sort of original order that just occurs over time. And I think just the intelligence of like, because the other thing, so this is fun. So we talked recently, and last year or the year before, when we had one of these conversations, we had a great conversation, but we disagreed on one key thing. And it was about the ontological primacy of awareness. And what that means, like ontology it's like the study of the nature of things, of like being, what is it? And I was on the side that like literally awareness is like what this is all made of. It's primary. And you weren't sure. You weren't saying no, you weren't saying yes. And then, you've had some experiences recently, and you're like, hey, this isn't me saying, hey, I was right, but it was like, yes, that is how that is how you see it now. And I'd love to hear about that. But just to wrap up my point, like, for me, when this happened, that became very apparent to me. It became incredibly apparent to me that, like, literally awareness is the fundamental, it's what it's all made of. Like, in the same way, when you have a dream at night and you see a person, the person's not made of cells. The person is made of mind, of the dream. Everything you touch and come into contact with is just the mind that is dreaming. It's all one material. And reality, my direct experience of it is all awareness. When I look at the wall and I look at the tree, the computer, like, on a very perceptual and real basis, I experience it as awareness, which is the same thing I am. And so it's this, like, this monistic, this unity, this like, when people say oneness, like, it's not the oneness of, like, I am merged with the chair, and, like, it's that underneath it all there is only one thing, and that thing is primary awareness. But so if that is our view, which that is my view, if that is kind of our view, then there really is no difference between inside outside stuff. And so if there is this, like, greater harmonization that is going on because you've come back into relationship with awareness, it can just as easily bring you something on the outside that you need as this obviously internal process that comes.
Yeah, and I think and we'll come to, what caused us to reconnect recently, right? But I think that has always been a very strong strain of thought in the New Age movement, but also leads into all kinds of rabbit holes of law of attraction stuff. And okay, now, so it's all made of awareness. Now, how can I control and manipulate that? And it's not really about that. It's not really about control and manipulation at all. In fact, it's the opposite, right? Because control is what got us into the soup in the first place. And the whole process of awakening is awakening out of that need to have control and believe that we're somewhat alienated from a system that now we need to constantly negotiate with, an attempt to manipulate and manage and control in order to survive. But yeah, just rewinding a little bit. Yeah, I think it was about 2 weeks ago that I wrote that last article on my Substack, and I've taken a break since then. I plan to return at some point to writing, but right now the break feels really, really good as the body mind system processes these changes. Because I had in my 20s a very significant awakening where I suddenly came into my being and my sense of this presence that always is actively a part of myself. And that was the first time that I disconnected from my ego identities. I am Shiv, right? And I realized this deeper sense of I am under the I am Shiv. It's not that the I am Shiv layer isn't true. It just means it's just a surface layer. And beneath that, there's this reservoir of being. Its presence is always there. It's always present. And moving into that was very freeing, because suddenly all my pain and problems and everything seemed irrelevant, right? And here I am connected with everything in a way that I've never been connected before. But over time, as that ego feeling started coming back, I started grasping for it. And that sent me off in another wild goose chase for 10 odd years. But recently, that shift that happened very spontaneously after a period of kind of challenge and hardship, especially psychologically, mental health wise. And I've written a lot about that transparently to my readers, so many people are very familiar with the process I've been through. But when that shift happened, it was a very different kind of shift. It was this thing that's so obvious and yet so subtle that you couldn't even call it a thing. It was so bizarre in that way. I suddenly shifted into this perspective where I realized I'm witnessing it all. I am the awareness, I am the being, and I am Shiv. So if you take the statement, I am Shiv, and you take the Shiv out, that was the first awakening, and then you take the am out, and there's a pure I, the pure witness, the I with that I and the I with the EYE. You can call it whatever you want, but the thing that is always aware. I suddenly became that. And that's when I realized I'm not only that, I'm the whole gamut, I'm the whole spectrum, from that I to the I am Shiv, all of it. It's just one thing. There's not three separate things. You can shift into different modes, but it's all one thing. And since then, you're right. It's been a very, very different experience of life. And yet, in a very strange way, nothing has changed. The same fears of the future exist, the same sort of emotional ups and downs exist. All of that is the same. And yet there's a different quality to the experience of it, right? And it's funny because one of the first people that messaged me after I wrote that article called Third Awakening was you. You reached out over Messenger. And I think you said, hi, how you doing? Whatever. And we just started shooting the shit over Messenger. And then we jumped on a call together. And you told me the same thing. You told me how, after you went through that process, you talked to this one guy who validated it. And it's so funny because I think this was 3 or 4 days after, that shift had happened that we talked. And already the mind had started creeping in with these thoughts of, wait a second, is this really, really happening? Is this me just making shit up? The little doubts had started already. And that's when you said this happened to you and you validated what had happened here. And just that was enough. It was just enough. Just there's something in the external world saying yes, mirroring it and saying, you're not fucking crazy, right? Because I got emails from people saying, oh, I think you're going through a mental health issue or psychotic episode or maybe a brain tumor. Well-meaning people, well-meaning thoughts, and understandable. But at the end of the day, I knew it's none of those things. This was something very, very real. But it just needed one person who understood exactly what I was going through to say, yes, what you're going through is valid. And that, thank you for that validation, because it meant a lot to me. And it's just that, right? I think each person, especially when they go through something like this, just one voice of validation is enough to say, okay, I don't have to necessarily trust that voice of doubt that's always echoing in the background. Since then, if I look at my life, it's 2-3 weeks on from there. My circumstances haven't changed at all. I still, financial insecurity, looking for a job in a very, very tough tech job market, all of that. And yet there's just this feeling of it's going to be all right, because now I'm no longer feeling that sense of alienation from life. I am the life that's unfolding. At every moment of every day, I am the life that's unfolding. And maybe that unfolds in a very beautiful way down the line, which there's a good chance of that happening. But maybe it doesn't. And that's okay too. You know what I mean? It's the ride. It is what's happening. And there's this deep love for what's happening over what I want to happen. There's still that part that of the mind that wants things to happen. That doesn't go away.
No.
But it's like a shift of power. There's a power balance shift that happens.
Yeah.
That's the only way I can put it.
It's like you're just situated in something which is deeper, and it's rooted deeper than that. And it's like, instead of being tossed about on the waves of ever-changing life, which is always an ever-changing, there's something which is not changing, eternal, anchor, being. Like, it's just you're rooted in that in a way. And it just, it gives you a capacity to engage in the world from a completely different place. And then that does influence how you engage in the world, right? Like, there's even like, for the most hard-nosed causality listeners, like, there's like you experiencing the world in a new way causes you to engage in the world in a new way, and different things start to happen over time. But I like had that nagging voice in the back of my head for like a year or a year and a half before I finally got to talk to somebody who like could just be like, oh yeah, like that is the experience that we're talking about. And it was, I knew what it was. There's a way in which it's self-evident. It is self-evident, it's clear, but people don't talk about like the extent to which all of your human foibles and neuroticisms and like it's just all still there. You are not somehow immune to it all. But you know, and there's a way that like you don't care though. Like you don't like it's not a problem anymore. It's not and it's not like a dispassionate, like I don't care, like I'm neutral or I'm dispassionate. It's like, if anything, I think it allows you to participate in your life more wholeheartedly. And if anything, it actually allows you to feel the joys and the sorrows with greater acuity and clarity.
Yeah, I would say it's not a I don't care. It's an I'm okay with this.
Yeah.
Even if it's painful, even if it's,
Yes.
really challenging. It's not like, oh, I don't give a fuck about it. That's apathy. But there's a deep empathizing with everything. There's like an intimacy with it. Yes, I'm in pain and I'm miserable. I'm okay with being in pain and miserable. I'm going to experience this now because this is what's happening.
Yeah.
That's a naturally occurring thing. It's not, I have to do this because
Correct.
I want to be spiritual kind of thing.
Correct. Yeah, it's not this management of you're trying to massage your experience. And it's like an existential yes. It's this big existential yes to life, to yes, I'm gonna live. I'm gonna participate. I'm gonna be here. And it's just it changes. It changes everything. And yeah, it's I think the other thing is like, it is a profound intimacy with reality. That is a way that I described it initially. It was one of my first attempts to, like, the week it happened, like to put words to it. And still to this day, it is one of my favorite descriptions. Compared to the place that one is before, one becomes like terrifically intimate with reality, with what's happening. And that intimacy actually breeds intelligence, because in comparison, I was disassociated before. I had all of these tricks and methods that actually disassociated me from life. And suddenly it's like I'm right there and I can't get back from it. And that intimacy, while perhaps uncomfortable in the beginning at times, it also breeds like intelligence, and you can see clearly because you're not running from it, you're not hiding, and it allows you to like just encounter the circumstances that are in front of you, and then you can make the right choice. And I made a lot of choices. I made a lot of changes in my life after, and that was quite important. I am actually coming up on my 4 o'clock stop here.
Yeah, that sounds good. And Steven, I think, we're going to be able to go deep on this on future podcasts as well, because I think there's so much territory to cover and I really love talking to you. But thanks a lot for joining again. We've always had great chats, this one included. And for viewers who want to reach out to Steven, share your links with me, especially your media links and your social media accounts. We'll put it all on there. And Steven, as usual, pleasure to chat, man.
Absolutely. Really enjoyed it. Great to do it again, and pleasure being here.
Yeah, chat with you in the backstage for a second.